Welcome to Mayor Ganim's greatest podcast on earth, featuring Bridgeport's Mayor Joe Ganim. So, Mayor, right now, the city is seeing...
Well, not even a how are you.
Oh,
this
fine,
is great
we'll
weather
stop.
we're having.
Let's start over. Take two.
No. We just keep going. I'm fine with that. I think the audience should know that you kind of forgot the pleasant salutations and things that introduce and warm up your guests in order to have a great conversation about whatever topic you want. So yes, please.
So moving on from great weather, and it's springtime in the city
It
of
is
Bridgeport.
springtime. It's also a day that I guess you should know, April 15th. If you're one of the millions of federal income taxpayers, today's the deadline. So hopefully your taxes are done. Hopefully you're getting a refund.
Absolutely. We like refunds.
Yes.
And speaking of taxes, we're going to talk about that in a moment. Because one of our topics is going to touch on that and how it impacts.
Local taxes.
Local taxes. So right now...
I know them well.
Yeah. Unfortunately.
Unfortunately. We all do.
So the city really is seeing momentum right now. With that, you take things like new development, you take public art, you talk about a budget that you just put forth to the city council, and you talk about what people experience here in the city as far as quality of life. But you also talk about, let's go back to those taxes for a moment and talk about things that are shaping Bridgeport right now in terms of city growth, in terms of how Bridgeport is transforming. And let's talk about something that might be confusing to people. I know that when I was a homeowner in the city of Bridgeport, I first heard about...
Happy homeowner?
Yes, I was, very much so. I lived on many streets here within the city, a couple of zip codes, if you will, in my time. But I remember you having a conversation with me and your staff about, oh, great, the grand list looks great. And I was like, oh, awesome. And I could tell by your enthusiasm that it was good news.
We were like, okay, write this up so that people could understand it. And you're like, what are we talking about?
Right. What is a grand list?
It's a grand. It's a fantastic list, a grand list. No, thanks, Ro. Yeah, I think on the overall kind of description of the city, I've heard, as you say, really positive movement. I heard Renaissance. In many ways, when you see the incorporation of the arts the way it is, which is, I don't want to say arts is a luxury. It shouldn't be. It's essential to, I think, the vibrancy of a neighborhood, of a community, in this case, of Connecticut's largest city, Bridgeport. But it's kind of in a positive way, challenging, but very exciting time. And as much as things are going to be talked about in the area of cutting the mill rate, parenthetically cutting some ways the rate the rate that you're paying on your property for taxes, and not always cutting the mill rate doesn't always mean your taxes get cut. So we'll get into that a little bit. But cutting the mill rate the way we did was because of that grand thing, the grand list, which is just property.
Okay.
It's everything except something that's not like nailed down, which is considered personal property. So it's a grand list of buildings, houses, one family, two family, three houses, everything that can kind of be taxed makes up your grand list. That includes automobiles. They're kind of categorized, and they're separate categories. But your grand list would primarily be, at least by size, the value of, and we get into how values are determined, the value of every building, everything that's owned in the city of Bridgeport, everything that's real property. And they have formulas and all that kind of stuff for what they are. But then you have automobiles. Mm-hmm. There's a mill rate on automobiles. And there's personal property taxes. So even, I guess, kind of computers and stuff like that, there's taxes. So the government taxes you at every which way they could when you on ownership. And so that is, I say unfortunately, the only reliable or controllable revenue source that comes directly to the municipal levels, in this case, the city of Bridgeport. So it's real important.
Right.
The hundreds of millions of dollars that get paid in by us, by residents, property owners. If you own property in the city of Bridgeport, you are or should be paying a tax bill. you got on your car. The city has an obligation to kind of make you notice of that. But you have an obligation to pay whatever it is. And that's done by a formula that says, the car is worth a certain amount. That's the value, and that's what's added for that one car to the overall tax or grand list of the city. So that's kind of a simple formula. It gets crazy. Today, we mentioned it's April 15th, so it's Federal Income Tax Day.
Right.
So we all know what that means. If you get a paycheck, you can see it right in there, and it says, federal income tax. It tells you how much is taken out in anticipation of paying your federal income taxes, which are due once a year. They take them out every week, or 2 weeks or whatever. So we know how that works. That's based on your income. If you make $100,000, they're going to tax you at, whatever that percentage is, 20%, 25%, I don't know what it is. And in theory, that's the amount you would pay to the federal government for what you earn. Doesn't matter if you own 10 cars, you own one house, you own an Empire State Building. None of that matters. It's how much you make in income. So I don't want to get people confused. And then the third one, just to really lay into the whole tax leveling here, it's the one that I just want to mention is sales tax. So that car you own, you pay property tax on it while you own it, and you pay sales tax on it. As you do on everything else when you buy something.
Right.
So, or somebody pays it when you sell it, too.
A lot of taxes, Mayor.
Yeah. And that's so I think of that one, just think of that one as really the state. That's a big one for the state of Connecticut. Sure. They have an income tax. We have an income tax in Connecticut, too. But we don't, no, local communities. Bridgeport doesn't have a sales tax. Bridgeport doesn't have an income tax. So what do we got? We got this property tax. So it's interesting and challenging because every city and town has the same system, same formula. They have a mill rate. They get to set the mill rate, but they have a mill rate. And it's based on the value of your property, your real estate, your cars. And what was funny, not really funny, but interesting, but, funny meaning kind of different, is that one year they looked at Greenwich and they said, wait a minute, they got cars, a number of cars by individuals who own property, own cars, own houses, probably too, in Greenwich. And the cars are worth like $10 million, $12 million. So they're getting taxed. You really realize how much that's more than comes up. That's more than a house in a lot. Greenwich too, probably on most houses, but certainly houses in Bridgeport. And so it's interesting how that tax, and when the state, the reason it came to light was the state allowed automobiles to be taxed with a mill rate different than real estate or real property. And so they saw that go down, and they said, wow, the town of Greenwich just lost, I don't know, $1 million in property taxes on automobiles, which is really not the biggest part of most towns' tax base or grand list. So are you exhausted yet on taxes?
I feel like
and that's new. That was like me trying to be simple about it, but it's very nuanced. And let me just continue on that. It's nuanced and it's important, and that's why I think this whole operation, this large nonprofit corporation, in this case, the city of Bridgeport, with all the services that we're obligated, committed, and are responsible for, from when the 911 we were over at National Public Safety and Telecommunications Week. We just appointed a new director of emergency services for the city of Bridgeport. Critical, important role. God forbid there's a disaster. Even this weather challenges, with this past winter, we talked about freezing, wires coming in. Somebody's in charge of that.
Right.
And that whole operation. So with all of that we have to kind of put together, it's very important to know that you're how to understand and how to focus on, and I would say this, how to be sensitive to the mill rate and the taxes. One, that it's a treasured source of revenue, but two, it's money that people, it's a large amount of money for people in their own personal budgets, and that's why I always keep the lid on taxes every year and look to cut them.
So just to recap a little bit about the grand list, if I'm hearing this correctly, it is essentially, in simplest of terms, the aggregate, the total number or the total value of properties in the city. So it's commercial buildings, it's residential buildings, so it's my house, but it's also my supermarket.
Yes.
It's my church in some cases.
Yeah, well, didn't want to get into that, but churches, government buildings, universities are nonprofit. Therefore, they can have status under our tax laws that say they don't have to. It's federal tax laws and state tax laws that dictate it, but that cities and towns abide by, which is that they don't have to pay mill rate tax. They don't have to pay property tax. They're not part of the tax grand list. I don't know if they're included in the grand list, and then there's just a zero next to their contribution, or they're not included. I'd have to kind of look.
Sure.
Because it's interesting when you want to look at what's the total amount of. So Bridgeport's a small geographic city. I think we're less than 17 square miles.
Right.
So there's not like if we were, I don't know, double that, right? 35,000 square miles in size. In theory, you'd have a lot more likely buildings and things that you could tax.
Right.
So when you're a smaller geographic city, and then you have the largest population, most people in the state, and part of it, by the way, is that have some of the greatest needs, or set up for that, but some of the greatest needs, it becomes an equation that's very difficult to keep the property taxes down.
Right.
That's why I'm so excited, and we've announced it, but if your sole source of Bridgeport information currently right now is this podcast, I have announced that we will have a budget which is the lowest mill rate at 27, and we're like, well, I'll explain that in a minute by comparatives, 27.75, which is the lowest mill rate the city of Bridgeport, lower than any other similarly sized city in Connecticut, but the lowest we've had it in decades or that I can remember. As a comparison, when I took office in 2016, the mill rate that was in place was 54.
Holy.
So what is that, double?
Yes.
Yeah. So 54, I could be off by a mill or two. I could look it up, but bear with me. That's what it was. And then, we kept it flat. If you ever hear the Ganim mantra on taxes is, you don't raise the taxes, you cut them if you can. You don't raise the taxes, hold the line on taxes. We have this revaluation thing, which is happening now, which we'll talk about.
No, you've always said that since I've known you. Since I've known you
Makes
for
such a
years.
difference. In stability, you have to be able to balance a budget. And in difficult, good times and in difficult times. And so one of the challenges you don't want to have a city like Bridgeport face, because we make it, I say we, I give credit to a lot of the department heads and our financial team and all that have established real good credibility in the financial markets and put the city in a very strong financial position. But I don't take for granted that the equation could go, as we say, sideways at any time if you don't have hands on deck. We've seen it in the past. This city, way back in the 90s, filed for bankruptcy and another mayor. We had to pull it out of bankruptcy. So these things can happen. And you see cities around. You see what happened with the Board of Education. Mm-hmm. They've come out, you don't use the term again, but come out with some real challenges, not blaming present company. But you can see how easily a 2, 3, 4, 5, in our case, $660 million budget, if it has anything more than a nominal challenge to it, could be devastating for everybody.
Right. I know a lot of people themselves are sometimes one emergency away from a household catastrophe. And so for a city, it's probably the same thing, right? I mean,
when we took over,
crisis.
At one point, the police cars had holes in the floors. This is years back. The undermanned. We made a commitment. I made a commitment to hire a substantial and continue to hire 100 new officers, expand community policing. The chief has been doing that. We've seen the other critical element that I always talk about quality of life is the feeling of and the reality of safety. And when you have the results that I think we've seen with the reduction, almost elimination really, of deaths reported from shootings in the city, which was, as high as the mill rate that I quoted you years ago. Right? It was in the 50s and plus. Yeah. To down to one or two, the result of domestics, where you couldn't stop unless you had a police officer in every household, is very good news for people that care about Bridgeport, that are part of Bridgeport, that are invested in Bridgeport. When you see that kind of stuff happening, with the mill rate going to its lowest levels in decades, crime statistics, always more to do, one's too many, with crime statistics plummeting to decade-low levels, and then the waterfront development, which I don't know if we're going to talk about today, and some of the other stuff, real positive. But, I'm going to give it back to you, Ro, on any topic. We always are, every day is a challenge, education funding, fixing potholes, fixing potholes, right? This time of year, just coming off of snowstorms and ice and cold, and then heading into the summer season for youth opportunities and all the like. So it's there's always something going on.
So doubling back around to grand list and mill rate. So when your grand list goes up, that means that there's more buildings that have higher value.
So
is what I'm
exactly.
assuming?
So yeah. So let's do it by one building. Forget about make the whole grand list is one building.
Okay.
And that building was valued at $100,000.
Okay.
So every 5 years, so it was valued at $100,000 in the year 2020. And the state law requires, and for valid reasons, requires that every municipality revalue, it's called, appraise in so many words, check the value of their grand list, everything on the grand list. So you hire an appraiser who goes out and looks at the house that in 2020, the year 2020, was $100,000. You bought it for $100,000. The guy sold it for $100,000. That's a market. That's arm's length transaction. That's pretty good evidence. And every other house, similarly sized, every other 4-bedroom or 2-bedroom or whatever your house is with is $100,000. Now, you just sold the house for $200,000 5 years later.
Okay.
So now, the good news is, and this is true of everybody in Bridgeport, and I'm not sure I'm going to leave anybody out. Everybody in Bridgeport, the value of what you own, if you own something in Bridgeport, real estate, is gone up. And I will say, I think it's still undervalued. I still think the value is going to go up. But anyways, you're going up to 200. Stand up and clap. You've just doubled your investment. And so now the city comes by and they say, okay, that was worth $100,000. It's clearly worth $200,000 now. And then the city goes back and says, we need $1,000, $5,000 to run this place. I got to figure out a number that sounds compared to the house.
Sure.
So we got to figure out how to get the $5,000. Before we had to charge you whatever $5,000 is of $100,000, 5%. So whatever 5% would equate to a mill rate. But now it's worth $200,000. We only need $5,000 still. We're going to charge you at a 2.5% rate.
Okay.
So they're able to, in this case, if it was
so my taxes don't double.
Your taxes don't double. In many cases, your taxes,
because that's scary.
So the theory is your taxes would, under that scenario,
right,
would stay the same. Now there's a lot more factors in place. The house doesn't usually go from 100 to 200 exactly. The amount that the city budgets for tax collection isn't a stagnant number. You got to remember on the backside you got education asking for $10 million more, which we're going to give them. You have the police department needs more officers. You have people that need their streets fixed. The list goes on. So there's a lot of factors, but generally what the idea is, the value goes up, and you're able to bring the mill rate down. Okay. And our overall mill rate, in real general numbers, went up from about, it was high sevens. So let's say it's $8 billion of all those buildings together, not the one house of 100,000, but every house,
right?
Every building, the all the stores, everything that's included in the city was just under $8 billion valuation in 2020. Okay. So we spent the last year getting ready for this 5 years now, 2025. It's actually 2026 now. The implementation, and it's $13 billion. Okay. So high percentage increased, right? 8 to 13. But also think about how many billions of dollars that is. We just did the math, $5 billion of increase in the grand list.
So where did that come from?
That's huge. If you were at 7 and 8 and you've increased by 5, that percentage is, 70-something% growth. So that far exceeds most other communities' change, mostly increase in their grand list growth. So because we had more growth, right? Because our properties in Bridgeport went up at a higher rate or quicker or faster or at a greater percentage than by comparative in the aggregate, in other words, altogether, than even our surrounding towns, then we got a bigger percentage of an increase in our grand list. And so that really puts us in a strong position. And it shows, all the gobbledygook about the numbers and the mill rates. What it says to everybody in Bridgeport is something's going right. Right. You can give us credit if you want, but you don't have to. But the bottom line is, if you invested in Bridgeport 5 years ago, your value probably did go up, some from 70, 80%, condominiums almost 100%. So those are real percentages. That's so what does that mean? If you sold it right now, everything's got different factors involved. You'd be 100,000, whatever that amount is, more to your personal growth, financial growth, your personal wealth. And, the biggest asset, the biggest thing that people usually own in their lives is their house. And now you're seeing substantial growth. So something's going right. Hopefully we're doing a good job at our end of it. And that's kind of part of the impact of this.
And it sounds like the mill rate coming down, that's the clutch portion of this equation, because I know a lot of
if the mill rate stayed the same, so
Yeah.
two things would happen. One is your taxes would, if your property went up by 50% or 100%, your taxes would, if it stayed the same, the net would be the same, depending on a lot of little stupid factors. But assume that's true, then the city, if that happened to everybody, you'd have the difference of whatever that percentage is from $8 billion to $13 billion of new mill rate.
Right.
And you'd probably have an extra $100 million, maybe not that much, but close to it, $100 million in additional, well beyond any budgetary needs. So there could be an equation, though, that's not either extreme. In other words, your property does double, let's say, but the mill rate doesn't get cut completely in half. And so you could have an impact that affects you with some increase. On the other hand, it could be the other way around too, where the overall grand list has gone up, your property's gone up too, but not as much, and you see a tax cut. And there's the third category, of course, which I don't know the percentage of how many, but will remain generally around the same.
So growth means more investment.
Growth means, it's more investment. There's two ways to get there.
And more value.
And more value.
Okay.
You can have an increase in value without increase in investment. Your house can just go up because the market goes up. Okay, or you could add a porch on, you could do new siding, you could add central air. That's an investment. Or you could build a garage next to it, or you could build another house. That would be growth.
And so what would you attribute this increase to?
Well, it's a combination of both, but frankly, it's more of the increase in values that we've seen across the city. You see the prices. Mm-hmm. They're not a lot of Bridgeport stock. We're one of the largest cities that we have one of the largest percentages of home ownership of cities our size. Mm-hmm. People own their homes in Bridgeport. And they may live on the first floor and own the second and third, but a lot of people own their own homes in Bridgeport. So we have a lot of homeowners. So a lot of the growth is the increase in the values of people's homes and buildings. There has been additional grand list growth, which is the new building permits.
Okay.
And we've had a boon on that too, huge. But that's the smaller side of the $13 billion grand list equation.
Okay. And that signals development.
That signals development, and we're having that. I mean, we got developers fighting over sites. I got to tell you, some of them not happy with the worst thing you can do. I will tell you, with me as mayor, with the city of Bridgeport, and the residents and the people of the city of Bridgeport, is don't over promise and under deliver. That's not what we signed up for. We get behind people. We may try and make it the best atmosphere for people to come in and invest. We want them to finish, come in and get things done. So that if it's housing, we want housing, affordable housing, and housing in general for people. If it's other strip malls, if it's the conversion of older buildings into whatever it is for modern use, we want this to continue at the pace that it's going now, which is a rapid pace, and we need people to kind of push the same way. So,
in one sentence, what should residents of the city of Bridgeport be looking toward or take away from this soundbite, essentially, knowing that grand list went up, mill rates coming down?
It's almost taken for granted, at least in my, these past, whatever it is, number of years. People, I think, if you know anything about Bridgeport budgeting, that we've created a foundation that is solid. When you get AAA bond ratings from critics at Wall Street, when you go to borrow money as a community for a city like this, that's not common. So that is really important, to be able to put ourselves in a position, I think, exceeding what we had even hoped for with our best of expectations, to see an atmosphere that allows for, encourages, and sees the results of a grand list growth of up to that we've seen $13 billion, says a real powerful message. And even if you don't care about that message, you should care about the increased value that it has to you and your family if you were invested in this city. And it's going to allow us to, I think, tackle a lot more effectively one of the challenges we have, which is additional funding for public education. additional funding for the Bridgeport schools, better management there. That's one of the key pieces that I think allows the continued increase in property values. The people wanting to live in Bridgeport, fighting to move into Bridgeport, overpaying for properties that, some would argue, into neighborhoods. Have that even continue and we're just going to have to meet that housing need, hopefully with the housing we have and with more that we want to create.